Hey everyone, Catherine Matai-Sundell here with Civility Partners. We'd love to introduce ourselves. Again, I'm Catherine Matai-Sundell, CEO and founder of Civility Partners, and I'd love for Tony to introduce herself. And Jonathan, if you want to move us to the next slide, that would be great.
All right, well, welcome everybody. I am Tony Herndon, and I'm so honored to be here with you all today. I am very passionate about this work, if you will catch on in a few moments. And, it's really about people's ability to connect. And that's one of the main things I love about DISC is it offers an opportunity for us to see ourselves differently and our coworkers and friends differently. And in all my years of conflict resolution, I haven't found a faster or easier way to aid potential conflict than the DISC assessment. So be ready. In times like this, there's going to be a little bit more heightened stress, potential more conflict. So I think you're perfectly in the right spot. So let's explore.
Yeah, let's explore. So you are in the right place if you are looking for a better way to communicate with your team, if you are having conflict with a team member and want to mitigate it. Maybe you want tools to better understand your team members. Maybe you want to recognize and celebrate your team members, or maybe you're looking for tools to improve your leadership effectiveness. And as Tony mentioned, we are very passionate about DISC, and I love working with Tony. She is so excited when she speaks because she's a high I, as you'll learn throughout here. So what you're going to learn today is a little bit of information about the DISC profile basics. Now, if you've taken DISC before and you know your profile, that's great. This is just a nice little refresher. If you've never taken DISC before and you're not really sure what it even is, this is a great sort of DISC 101. So either way, you are good to go. Tony will give you the basics. And then we'll go through some preferences and challenges for each profile. We'll talk about how DISC can tie into employee engagement and really leadership right now during all of this, and ways that you can sort of interact with your employees in ways that work for them given their profile. And then we'll give you some personal leadership tips. Before we jump in, Jonathan, if you could move us to the next slide where we're introducing Civility Partners. Just wanted to tell you a little bit about us. Civility Partners was founded in 2009, so we've been around for 11 years, and we have served a huge array of industries, a huge array of clients. And so we've seen a lot along the way. And we find, interestingly enough, that as crazy as human behavior is and as unpredictable as human behavior is, there is some predictability. It doesn't really matter what industry you're in. And we've also served or had the opportunity to appear in a lot of cool places as experts. So just wanted to introduce you a little bit there to Civility Partners. And Tony, I will let you take it away.
All right. Well, one of the main things I notice that causes a lot of misunderstandings or misinterpretations is this idea of assumptions. And so this Henry Winkler quote, aside from making me think of the Fonz, I really enjoy because it's so straightforward. Assumptions are the termites of relationships, right? Don't you think just like me? Why don't you think like me? And if you think differently, then you must be wrong, is usually the way these conversations go in some format. So one of the things that is important to remember is that employees don't leave companies, they leave managers. Typically, if you look at the most recent research that's out there, a Gallup poll of over 1 million workers concluded that the number one reason that people quit their jobs is bad bosses or immediate supervisors. So that's 75% of workers who voluntarily left their jobs did so because of their bosses and not the position itself. So in spite of how good a job might be, or in this case, how great benefits might be, people are quitting because the relationship is not healthy. So DISC, again, is just such a great tool for looking at how to raise our awareness about ourselves and others. And many of you have probably already taken a DISC assessment of some sort. If you have not, I just want to give a little bit of an overview. And if you have, great. This will be a great way to remember some of what you were taught already. First and foremost, the DISC assessment is not a skill assessment. It's style preference assessment. So it measures observable behaviors. And the cute little analogy that I like to give that helps me keep it in the back of my mind when I'm looking at my coworkers and wondering what they are is the elevator analogy. So back when we all used to be able to cram into elevators together, this would have made more sense.
Fair point.
If you look at what it means to be a high D, and we're talking a real high D, these are the folks who might walk into an elevator. They may have someone also walking down the hallway towards the elevator, but they're very task-oriented and focused for what they need to do and accomplish. So they may be the ones who come in the elevator and push the door closed. Nothing personal. They just need to get to where they're going, right? So that's one way to look at a high D in this analogy. A high I, like myself, is someone who, I don't care how many people I'm inconveniencing in that elevator. If I see someone in the hall, there's room for one more. Come on in. The high S, these are usually our very accommodating group. And so they're going to let everybody off the elevator first. They'll let everyone who is waiting onto the elevator. And then they may move into the elevator and into a space where they're not taking up space of other people. And then our C's, these are the folks who are going to come into that elevator, look at the permit, and if it's out of date by even a day, they may take the stairs. All right, that's an exaggeration, but it's kind of a cute way to remember how DISC flows if you're a high one of these letters. So we'll move on to the model. And the model is a great way for those of you who like things a little bit more succinctly than elevator analogies. But you can see that there's basically two things to pay attention to. There's the pace, which is your either fast-paced or your deliberate paced. And then there's your orientation to their task or people. And for example, as I speak, you're going to be observing my tone, my pace, my body language. And these are things that will give you a clue that even if Catherine hadn't told you I was a high I, you might very well guess this coming through here. And this is no coffee, everybody. So, you know. We do have a little quiz for you that I'd like to present on the next slide. And I'm going to have you guess, and then if you wouldn't mind putting it into the chat box what you think each individual is as far as their letter grouping. So let's look at Ellen Degeneres first. I'm going to give you a little bit of a background on her, and you tell me, based on what you see here on the pacing and what she's energized by, what you think she is. So she's a TV personality, she's a comedian, she's very gregarious, she loves to dance and have fun. She's really about inspiring people. So I'm going to give you just a few seconds to type in, she's a high, what do you think? And then I'm going to let Jonathan's voice from the other world tell us what he's noticing the most of.
You know what, Tony, I can see it too, so I'll shout it off.
Perfect. Okay.
Yeah, we'd love for you to interact with us so we're not just talking at each other. What do you think? I don't think we're seeing any comments come through, so Tony, why don't you go ahead and give us the answer?
Okay. Actually, Catherine, I bet you can guess.
Well, I think she's a high I as well.
You got it. Yes, she's made out of my same cloth, so I definitely identify. Our next character here is Nelson Mandela, and he's an anti-apartheid revolutionary and former president of South Africa. And he obviously loves his people. He's all about change. The type of change that he's enacting took a long time. So it took really a methodical approach, which he had to be very patient about. So if you're looking through some of these characteristics of deliberate, of, cares about people, very helpful, very into planning, if you guess that he's a high S, you are absolutely correct. And then Judge Judy, let's see it. Real fast paced, quick decision making. Don't give me the backstory. The law says this, you're guilty. Catherine, any guesses?
We're getting some comments coming through, but I'm wondering if there's a delay based on when they're coming through. So Judge Judy, she's a high D. If you didn't already type that in, maybe you did, and I'm just not seeing it yet. This is our first time with this new webinar stuff, so we're working through it. Yep. All right. So I'm getting some Mandelas. People did guess a high S, and I'm seeing some Ds come through for Judge Judy. Perfect.
Fantastic. And of course, that leaves Albert Einstein as a high C, which makes sense. He loves to be contemplative. He's interested in discovering truths. He's really into precision and analysis. So those high Cs that are into those types of things, very task-oriented, complex problems, he fits that mold very well. Now, for those of you, I'll move to the next slide, who may have already taken a DISC assessment, this is going to look familiar to you. And I'll let the slides catch up. If you have not taken DISC assessment, This is probably one of the more confusing parts because it shows the graphs and you have to explain the graphs a little bit. So as soon as the slide advances, I'll go ahead and show you that graph. Perfect. And you're going to see that there's 4 parts that we are looking at. Of course, you've heard high D, high I. I'm still not quite clear what all that means. Well, the high D stands for dominance, and it's their preference in the sense of that column looks at somebody's preference for problem solving. If you're in looking at the I column, what that's going to do is look at your preference for how you connect to people. If you're looking at a high or a high S, or if you're looking at the S column, it's how you develop a plan, your preference for that. And then C's, that column looks at working with procedures. And so just because you are above that middle line, that thing that's called the energy line, it doesn't necessarily make it better. In fact, that's one of the problems of looking at a graph here in the US is we think that, oh, higher is better, lower, not so good. Not in this case. When you are above that energy line, those are your preferences. That is what you are naturally. And that's what you are 24/7. So even if I move you to Canada or move you to wherever, you're going to be that. If no matter what time of day, that's you. And in essence, it's looking at what you're, well, I shouldn't tell you this part because you'll have to take the assessment. You'll see it a little bit better that way. But in this sense, it's looking at what you prefer to do naturally. Now, the next graph, what that looks at is it looks at what you were doing the exact day that you took the assessment. And this is fascinating because if I took this assessment every month for the next year, my natural graph would not change, but my adaptive graph would. So when the slide advances, I can show you that this changes. And sometimes this will change based on the 3 R's. And so that would be your role that you are playing, the responsibility you have for that day, and the relationships that are going on during that day. And if I look at this and I were to make some kind of an assessment, I know that the C column is all about procedurals. It's about accuracy. Whoever this was that took this on the day that they took the assessment, they must have been doing something very specific that required a lot of attention to detail because their high C came up. Now, the reason I mention this is, that's great. They were able to do budgeting that day. They do it once a month. Their C looks like this. If they had to suddenly switch into accounting, and that was their new role at the firm, perhaps, this would tell me as a boss that this person could potentially burn out. That yes, they can do it. We all have capability to stretch into areas that we're not used to doing or not comfortable with or are not our preferences. But if we are having to maintain that because of changes, it could very well affect our interest in staying with the company or how we relate to one another. And so the adaptive graph is actually a really important component to know about how you're stretching into areas that are newer or not as preferable. And this is a great chance to really be aware of this because a lot of us during this time of quarantine are being asked to stretch into areas that we're really not comfortable with. Some people don't like the technicalities of having to do all this virtual interfacing. Some people are being asked to do certain roles they weren't before. And so self-care, I just want to throw that little piece in, is really key to pay attention to what you need to be able to do your job well and to stretch well. Now, I'd like to go ahead and take a few moments to explain the letter systems a little bit more. This will be review for some of you who have already taken some type of a DISC class or webinar, but it's going to be a great for us to make sure that we're understanding what we're looking for both in ourselves and in other people. So if you want to go ahead and look at the next slide. This will share what our high Ds are. And so high Ds, they love problem solving and risk taking. They love handling situations with great expediency. So these are our very quick pace folks, if you remember, fast. And yeah, Catherine, if you haven't seen her, she's pointing at herself. She's a wonderful high D. Very results driven. She's fitting into all of this, right? Conquering challenges gives her energy, right? I'll just use her as an example. And of course, Catherine will be able to speak to this in just a moment, but one of the challenges that high Ds have is that their assertiveness can actually make them a little bit demanding to other people or other styles. And so what I like to have people think about, especially if they're a high D, is this concept of an emotional bank account. So if I'm making demands from other styles that are not also high D, I very well could be pulling from them emotionally. Right. And so I don't want to lead to emotional bankruptcy or a lack of trust or connection with my staff or employees, for example. And so that's just a good thing to hold on to. And Catherine, did you want to add something for high D?
I do. So I did not mention this earlier, but I am a subject matter expert on the topic of workplace bullying and do specialized coaching for people who have been pinned as a bully. So you have a leader who is very smart, really great at their job, but appears to be pretty abrasive in the way that they communicate. And so I specialize in coaching those individuals. Now, any preference, any of these profiles could certainly engage in abrasive, even abusive behavior. But I do find a commonality in those folks that I coach that they probably are high Ds. And so they are dominant. They are energized by challenges and getting things done. They need things done quickly. And as Tony's saying, that can really come out pretty abrasively. So just something to think about if you're a high D. It's something I have to think about as a high D, that just because I want something done quickly, and I do feel frustration rising up inside of me if things aren't done quickly, that I have to be really self-aware and learn to sort of temper that. So there is a good correlation between a high D and someone who might be accused of bullying. So something to think about and be aware of if you are a high D, that you've got to have that self-awareness.
I love it. Thank you. Thanks for sharing your personal story too. That's awesome. All right. So the next slide will showcase what it is if you're below the energy line in your D. And in essence, all that means is that you have a preference for, instead of that expediency, that you're more reflective, that you have more of an interest in gathering data and before you offer an opinion versus it just coming right on out. And I'm in this boat. I'm a lower D, and where I tend to gather my data is more through other people. So I do a lot of people connection and networking to figure something out. I'm not necessarily with each one of these going to go into what it means too much when you're at the energy line or closer to the energy line, just above or below. But I'll just say a blanket statement that in essence, what that means is that you have the most ability to flex between the two. So you can go into that more expediency place, or you can come more into the reflective place, for example, with Ds. So we'll go ahead.
Actually, Tony, can I interrupt and give a quick little case study, just in application? I was just thinking about you and I. So as Tony and I were putting these slides together, she said, hey, can we get together? I'd like to chat with you about my ideas for the slides. And of course I said, sure, I'd love to have Tony come in. I love seeing Tony because of all of her wonderful positive energy. But then she kind of came back around and said, well, I wondered if maybe you'd rather just kind of do it on our own. And of course, COVID had something to do with it, that she was concerned that maybe I didn't want her in the office. But in all honesty, Tony, I was a little bit relieved, just because like, okay, she's going to do it and I don't. So that was a high D and a high I working together there, where I just, that's really, I and D really playing out. So I just wanted to share that, where Tony wanted to work with me in person. I wanted us to just kind of do it on our own because that would be faster. So
I love it. And the key to all of that is awareness. It's me taking 2 seconds to think about another style. It's you following up saying, you know, I really do care about you and miss you. You know, so we got what each other needed and still got this produced. So that's an awesome example. All right, well, we will move on to what it is to be a high I. And these, I think you illustrated this perfectly. This is an especially difficult time during quarantine for high I's, because we are all about connecting with people. We are all about spending time. We are all about, you know, the room full of people. If they're strangers, they're just friends we haven't met yet, right? We are into connection. And so during this time, it's tricky, but just so you know about the style itself, these are folks who are very into influencing others, inspiring others. We're energized by frequent connection and contact with people, and we definitely express ourselves openly. That seems pretty obvious by now, I'm sure. But the same challenge is that emotional bank account. So high I's like myself, we have to be very careful not to dominate in our own way with either enthusiasm, which can be, especially on Zoom meetings that are happening, it can really dominate the room, or extraneous information that's not important to what's happening. So these are things to be aware of, because I can just as easily pull from an emotional bank account if I'm not being sensitive to other people's needs. So let's look at now what it is to be lower I. And these are folks, they still love people. They just prefer to be a little bit more in the background. So that's why I have the behind the scenes backstage gentleman here. He's indicating that he's all about team effort, but just a little bit more in the background in that way. Being center stage would not be his first, second, or even third choice for interacting and spending time around people. And again, if you're near that middle line, it just means you have more ability to flex. So the next style is a high S. And these are folks who love to have systems in place, methods. They love to plan. They love being connected to a team as far as a team player rather than a team leader. They really prefer stable, consistent environments. So again, this time of quarantine is difficult. There's a lot of changes. Sometimes procedural changes or expectations are changing on a daily basis in some cases. But the beautiful thing about high S's is that they can remain calm under pressure. So as mentioned before, this is the most accommodating style and can really have a very calming effect on teams. One of their challenges for really high S's to be aware of is that their preference for stability can be observed as just maintaining the status quo. So these are usually the folks that will ask questions like, why does this need to change? Can you explain what's important about this here? These are beautiful questions if you embrace them, because they really put it back on the change makers to explain it and explain the path forward. And then they can see themselves as high S's fitting into how to make that happen. So really embrace the good questions of your high S's. They're not being sticks in the mud. They're just trying to make sure that they know how best to plan the trail ahead. So if we look at what it is to be a lower S, these are individuals who love to be spontaneous. So as much as the high S wants to kind of slow down and keep stability, the lower S's are all about brainstorming and change, and they're really more relaxed about timelines, and they're definitely open to new approaches. So we'll just move on to a high C, which is our last letter grouping. These individuals are really awesome when it has to be accurate and thorough and correct. So they're all about, making sure procedures are followed. They have very high standards. They're logical. They like to know all the facts. And one of the things is you really want to make sure these individuals have time. They're very cerebral, and they can work wonders when you give them that time. So for example, if you have a meeting coming up and you're going to be discussing some things about change or ideas or innovation, these are the individuals you're going to want to give that agenda to, or even possibly the questions to, at least a day in advance. That's a really great way to help the high C's show up their best. Now, some of the challenges that high C's have to be aware of is that they will have done their due diligence. So sometimes they can have paralysis by analysis, a little too much research, or they can actually give you a little too much. So just being aware of how much information you really need to offer to someone else, or really need to dive deep to get. And one other quick thing is that sometimes they're so cerebral and so in their mind that they even forget to smile. So sometimes these are the folks who seem very task-oriented, which fits with their desk profile, but they almost seem a little aloof. And it's good for high C's to remember how they come off in their body language. All right, lastly, the low C's, these are individuals who can be more conceptual. They have a real, let's go for it, can-do attitude with a big picture viewpoint. So instead of being so narrow and specific, these are more the Hawkeye view of things. And accuracy on paperwork might not be so high. This is usually where I fit in, so. Yeah, but let's take a look at the next slide. And this is where we're really going to start to nugget into how to use DISC in an everyday setting. Well, our current everyday setting has to do with pretty much staying in place, right? Sheltering in place due to COVID. And so how do you maximize your team's talents while you're working remotely? And these are some things to consider when you're looking at your team. So if you have high D's on your team, you're definitely going to want to utilize the drive they have for solving problems, allow them to create some of the more uncertain aspects of the changes that we're all going through. Or if the business has a new business plan, these are wonderful folks to come in. Things are changing so fast, and these high Ds are driven by this. So this is a great way to utilize a high D. Excuse me. And then high S, or high Is rather, you want to utilize their energy so they can enliven a lot of online teaching and meetings. This is why I'm here today. But you can also delegate opportunities to set up virtual social events, virtual happy hours. And this helps keep the team together in this time of isolation. It really helps those where the socializing aspect is a part of connection and it's really important. It helps keep that team alive and together. The high S's, you're going to want to utilize their love for systems and generating procedures, especially for this new environment. They can also tackle things like scheduling demands. A lot of things are changing now. There's a lot more meetings in some cases or trainings in some cases. And so you also want to utilize their calming demeanor to help the team stay centered in this time of heightened anxiety. And lastly, the high C's, you can utilize them best by really relying on their interests and ability to go deep with analyzing or complex things like the new technology. Even a lot of people have not necessarily even used Zoom before, for example. And so that's an example where you can really help the team in understanding things well that the team needs in that technical, complex way.
I'm curious, before you go on to the next slide, Tony, I'm curious to hear from our audience, which profile are you? Are you like, I'm a high I first and then very closely followed by a high D. I know you're a high I. Curious, those of you listening out there, after explaining all of this, what resonates most with you? Or maybe you've taken a DISC assessment before, and so you already really know what your profile is, but would love to hear from you. So go ahead and type that in while we go on to the next slide. And Tony's got a few more comments for you on COVID and DISC.
Yeah, that's a great point. I'm such a high I, everything else is below the energy line. So, yeah, so working in remote teams, these are things, now the tips I'm going to give you in just a second, these are things to consider for yourself. And so these are great times that we have with all this extra time to be a little bit more self-reflective. So here's some things to consider, especially if you know what you are, or it's starting to become more obvious what you may be, is if you're a high D, how do you not suppress ideas and in the interest of efficiency in moving through a meeting? So if I know I only have you for an hour and I want to get stuff done, but I also want to be creative and innovative and all those things that we hold dear, that we put into our company values, how do I still live that piece by giving space and slowing down a bit? Right? That's something for our high Ds to consider. And also high Ds can consider building in a social aspect. If it's not the preference, right? Or it's not natural, or there's a lot of work that still needs to get done, even just a simple icebreaker would be enough to pull some of those social elements into the group before jumping into harder core work that day. So a couple things there. And then high Is, like I already mentioned, you definitely don't want to monopolize conversations with extraneous chatter or overexuberance that might be detracting from what's going on. You want to consider maybe moving the extended personal check-in and conversations to a happy hour or maybe after the meeting so that you still get a chance to connect with your coworkers at a more appropriate time. High S's, this is sometimes tricky for high S's, is to be courageous enough to really point out things in the face of everybody being stressed. These are individuals that are really about peacekeeping. So there's a propensity for high S's in some cases to stay a little bit more quiet and observe, but to really find that courage and let it out. Say what you're seeing, say what's happening, saying what needs to happen. So you can also look for ways to offer your gift of calm in the face of chaos approach to the team and just reassuring them through your own modeling, just who you are, that we don't have to be anxious with one another. We can treat each other with civility and kindness during this little heightened stress time of COVID. And then our high C's is you can really look at how can I best help my team through offering a little bit more organization in requiring that my superiors offer me agenda meetings beforehand, or inquiring about what kind of questions will we be talking about at the end of week on this. And not only will it benefit you, but it'll benefit the entire team. So yeah, it's going to be important to bring in those skills to offer to your team. Now, you may have wondered, okay, I don't know what my coworkers are. How would I guess? One really fun way that we've set up for you is on the next slide. Is the beginning of our quiz here. So what I'm going to have you do is on the next 3 slides, you'll analyze an email. Now, you can tell I'm a high I just by the way that I talk. But if I were to email you, there is also a style that will come through in email. If you have a high D, that will come through, et cetera, et cetera. So let's go ahead and look at the first quiz. I'm going to take a sip of water and give you just a chance to read this, and then see if you can start to formulate what disc style, what high letter this person might be. And I'll give you a couple hints in just a second.
And while they're doing that too, the responses to our question about what profile people are, we've got high Ds, high Cs, high S and D, lots of high Ds and high S's coming through.
Love it. Love it. All right. Yeah. And each style brings such amazing benefits to a team. There's no one style that's better than another. It's really just what is the good fit for the preference the person has. All right. So we've had just a moment to take a look at this, and I'm going to point out a couple things like exclamation points. I'm going to point out the fact that there isn't just one happy face. There's 2 types of happy faces. There's that extraneous information, and that should give you a big hint. Also, there's this idea that, interested in hearing from you or pointing out team's talents and experiences, those influencing or commending parts, right? The tone is very playful. So do we have any guesses, Catherine, on your slide?
I did not see them, but they may be delayed. So go ahead and jump in and you can give them the answer.
All right. Well, I'm sure Catherine has received many an email from me that looks exactly like this. So if you have guessed that it comes from a high I, you are correct. Yes. And let's do the next one. The next one, I don't know, it might take a while. Probably not, because it's pretty direct. So you can see the person who wrote this, it's really about efficiency. The pace of it, if you want to give a pace to an email, is really quick, right? This person is saving their own time writing it, making sure you have the basics of what you need and what they need to impart to you. So if you guess that they are a high D, you are absolutely correct. Now, the next one is a little bit tricky because the high S's and high C's, which are the 2 that are remaining, have some similarities. And I'll let you read this, but I'll also share while you're reading it some of the similarities. Both are very concerned about planning. Both are very concerned about offering information. One might be a little bit more specific, but what really keys this off, if you're really thoroughly reading this, is you're going to notice the tone. So, and the orientation. They're either task-oriented or they're people-oriented. And as you read through this and you start seeing things like warm regards, hi, Sam, and you start seeing things like really a lot of appreciation for your time, or, let's work together, right? The coming together of people. If you had guessed that this comes from a high S, you are absolutely correct. So it's going to show a little bit more people orientation. I don't have a high C up here because it is similar, but one of the biggest differences is some of those people orientation parts will be left out. You'll have a lot more just here are the facts. And there's a very high chance that you're going to have it either numbered or bulleted. So the overall look of what a high C offers you is really beautiful. It's almost like resume quality, right? Where you have the nice bullet points, it's clean, it's clear, it's concise. So that's usually how a high C will offer their emails. And I've often been asked, I'm not sure the best way to give an email to someone I don't know, or even if they give me an email and I kind of want to match it back, but I'm not an emoji person, like how do I offer it back to them? The high S is the best way to go. So if you think about give them information, be connecting of them socially in that sense, you can't go wrong, right? So high S is a good way to think about it. Now on the next slide, you're going to see an example of what Civility partners offer. We have a great little tip sheet that we offer people. And this is one quick example. So on the left side, you would see this is in essence what you would be getting, and then this is how the right side shows how to respond to each style. And the tip sheet is wonderful. It offers a lot of nuggets that will be very helpful to save off a lot of misunderstandings, because I will share with you a misunderstanding. I, being a high I with all that extraneous information and lots of love and, hearts and whatever, I used to have a coworker that would send me something back saying, we're meeting at 5, right? Like, not even, like, where's the hello? Where is she mad at me? Like, I really misunderstood her directness until I realized, like, oh, it's just her style, because when she shows up, she's lovely and smiley and we have a great time. So I really needed to understand that through email, it's easy to misunderstand tone. Through text, it's really easy to misunderstand through tone. So things like this can be really helpful. Now, mentioning misunderstandings is really important to capitalize on with how DISC works. And on the next slide, you're going to see that there are certain styles, and you can do one more click to show up that perfect. Thank you so much. And what this illustrates is that there are styles that naturally have a demand for a little bit more stretching in order to communicate really well. And so what this requires is a higher level of awareness about your own style and the needs of the other person's style. So for example, if you have a high I, like myself, who's quick to pace, whose priority is about people, and I'm trying to be quick with someone, but I want to talk about my weekend and it's so fun and isn't this great, and I'm working with a high C, they're task oriented. So they really want to get their work done. They're not interested in the, 15 minutes of what I did over my weekend necessarily, because they have work to do. Also, they're going to be a little bit more deliberate in their pace. So if I come in too exuberant, I'm like a tsunami to some high Cs. In the same token, I look at someone who's all about work. It's easy for me to misunderstand that and say, well, they don't care about me as a person because they're just so focused about what they need to get done. So you can see where there can start to be some misunderstanding between I's and C's. Same holds true for D's and S's. So a D, as Catherine Munch mentioned, typically a lot of these high-powered folks who got there because they can make decisions quickly. They're good about expediency, getting stuff done. They're usually in a position of authority, so they need to get stuff done. They need to motivate their folks to get stuff done. And if they're working with a high S who is a little bit more deliberate in the pace, they're trying to connect and they're trying to watch out for their team and they're trying to share this with their high D boss, for example, it's very easy for their voice to get suppressed. And so that's one of the tensions there, is the high S's feel like they can't speak up to their high D's, and the high D's feel like, they just need to get it done. And so a little bit of that emotional bankruptcy can potentially happen. So here's just a few things to keep in mind. And Catherine, did you want to share a little bit more about this?
Yeah, I think, as you're talking, what we're saying here is really that you have to be really self-aware and then be able to adapt. So I know I'm a high D and I'm a high I, but to be honest, I feel like I sort of lean into the D more. That's the one that resonates with me more. And so if I'm working with someone who's an S, then I have to be really self-aware that I'm a D, I want things done quickly, but this person is going to be different in the way they need things to get done and the way that they communicate. So what I'm saying is I have to adapt to the high S, especially because I'm the leader. But then the question is, well, why do I have to be the one to adapt? Why can't they adapt to my style? I'm the leader. If they know that this is how I am, why aren't my employees all adapting to me? And so I think it's important to address that. And really, in a perfect world, we'd all be stretching to adapt to the other one. We'd all be super self-aware and be able to say, oh, I know I'm this way, but I know this person's that way, and let me adapt. And as we both adapt, we both would be communicating a lot more effectively. But bottom line is that's not the world that we live in, correct? So just want to put out there, as a leader, it is important for you to adapt. And just as somebody who wants to be an effective communicator, it's important for you to adapt. And we get the same kind of a comment when we're talking about something like inclusivity or equity. Why do we have to adapt to this other group of people and vice versa? Well, that's because that's what building relationships is all about, is learning how to communicate in ways that the other person can understand you. And then as Tony mentioned, you may not, part of this is helping you be aware of yourself, but also now maybe you can understand some of your coworkers. And what if you are unsure of someone else's style? As Tony mentioned, treat everyone like a high S until you can figure out their style even better. But really looking at emails is a great way, because then you have a moment to kind of pick through it and pick out some of these indicators that Tony is talking about. So it is important to try to understand other people. And I have a similar story to you, Tony. I was through a networking group trying to arrange a meeting with someone. And I am, as I said, I'm a high D, but this person's emails were super short and everything abbreviated. And, it was like, hey, I'm free on this day at this time. Does that work for you? So I've still got my high I in there, being people oriented. And he responds with very short, like, yes, that works, period. I don't even think he said that. I think it just said yes, period, and so I got really offended. But now knowing all of this, I think he was probably just more of a high D than I am. All right, so I also wanted to talk a little bit about employee engagement. So if you want to move to the next slide, and I recognize right now with COVID, we are not necessarily focused on any employee engagement initiatives. We're probably more focused on survival of our team and ourselves and our business. But it's still important, and we can still apply this to the COVID situation. So just to talk for a moment about what employee engagement even means, there are many definitions out there. If you're familiar with the Gallup Q12, that seems to be the big name engagement survey. And Gallup defines engagement as enthusiasm, which is great for a high I, but I don't necessarily agree with that definition. So here at Civility Partners, we define employee engagement as having self-efficacy, which means that you believe you have the abilities to overcome the challenges before you. Engagement is about believing you fit into the organization and your team, and also being inspired by the work that the organization is doing and that you yourself as an employee are doing. So let's move to the next slide and talk about efficacy. So again, efficacy is the belief that you can overcome the challenges presented before you. So in the world of employment and dealing with employees or working, finding jobs that we want to have and that we would thrive in, what that means is you should always be stretching at work, right? But as Tony had mentioned earlier, if somebody is a low C, they probably should not be doing accounting work. And so you don't want to give somebody with a low C all of that accounting work. You don't want them to be your bookkeeper, because that goes beyond their skills and abilities, right? So that would lower their self-efficacy, because they would constantly feel like they're not able to achieve the task that's been given to them, versus if you give them some other task that does work for them. And so just considering, now and in the future, but also with COVID and any adjustments you're having to make to work right now, it's important to think through what challenges are my employees facing that they feel like they cannot overcome, and how can I help them have the right tools and resources so that they can overcome it. But also, what would work best for different people. So for example, one of my clients, they have an individual who just on his own, didn't even ask, started at what he's calling the water cooler lunch hour. So at lunch between 12 and 1, anybody can log into their intranet there, and he posts some questions to create some conversation so that people can sort of chat while they're still working, or maybe they've clocked out to eat lunch or what have you. That's him using his skill as a high I. That's a sort of a challenge that he can overcome easily, and it fits within his wheelhouse. So that's going to make him happy that he's able to do that and manage that, versus if you were asking somebody else who's in a different preference to do something like that. So again, as you're thinking through the different job tasks that need to get done, try to consider DISC preferences and assign accordingly. Let's see, what else? So a high I may have a challenge of following through, just to continue on with that example. So this individual who's doing the water cooler lunch chats great for him as an I. He may have a hard time following through on some of his work tasks because that's, not necessarily within his wheelhouse. So you've got to maybe work more with an individual like that, especially now where they're remote. You can't necessarily see them. How can you work with your team members or your direct reports to ensure that they are following through on things, right? Let's see, as you're communicating assignments, think again, put an emphasis on their preferences. So a high C really does need direction and clarity. So you might want to assign scheduling to them or something that requires that extreme accuracy, versus a high D. They're maybe already stressed out, and that's going to come through in their communication. So they might be a good person to kind of keep things moving forward with clients, so they can sort of have an outlet for that stress. And they're going to need to feel like they're getting things done, and that's going to be the way to alleviate their stress. So on the next slide, let's talk about fit. So the second piece of employee engagement is that people feel like they fit in with the organization. And of course, we talk a lot about inclusivity and equity. Those are important concepts that, I'm in HR. That's what we're talking about a lot in HR right now. And so we could say, well, people have to feel like they fit in, when we're talking about race or disability or gender, but also they have to feel like they fit in with their DISC profile. So if you have a big group of a bunch of high Ds, and then you get that one high I in there, that high I may feel like they do not fit in. So you've got to consider, how do you still make room for the minority DISC profile, just like you would consider how do you make room for a minority due to their race or religion or sexual orientation. So making sure that you're really celebrating everybody, but celebrating them in the way that works for them. A high I probably would love to get that recognition over the Zoom call. Hey, Tony, great job on the webinar, pat on the back, group virtual hug, versus somebody who's a low I probably would not want that type of recognition. So you can consider people's DISC profiles as you're giving them recognition and celebration. And then conflict also comes into play here. And so how people manage conflict comes from a lot of different experiences they've had over the years, but certainly their DISC profile plays a role in that as well. So Tony, I'll let you speak about conflict since you're a resident conflict mediator.
Well, I love using the DISC assessment as a tool in a standard mediation. Typically, in order to get people to be self-aware and open and vulnerable, especially in front of people they're having conflict with, it can take 2 to 4 hours. But with DISC, you can get right to the heart of it within an hour and have a lot of aha moments, like, I now get why there's stress between us. I now get what I can do to mitigate that. I now know as a boss how to help my team become stronger because I can see right in their DISC profile areas for development. And so it's fantastic. We just recently worked with an organization, and there were 2 individuals that were in conflict, and their boss brought us in, and it was fascinating. I said, I haven't met your employees yet, but let me see if I can guess what's going on. And just based on DISC, I shared where tensions would possibly be happening. And she said, are you reading my mind? So it's a really powerful tool that just takes a lot of the taking it personal out of it and showcases how it's style and preference differences.
Yeah, it's a great tool. I'm excited to be able to use that. All right, last slide here on engagement, especially right now, is the third piece of engagement is inspiration. So from a global perspective, everyone in your organization needs to be inspired by what it is the organization is accomplishing. So whatever the mission of the organization is, people are more likely to be engaged if they're, tied to that mission or believe it's important. But also the way the workplace is set up for them is going to be inspiring. So for example, a high D is really inspired by success and by results. I feel some serious satisfaction when I accomplish something, right? When I put a goal out and then we accomplish it. For example, right now the team is working on a reopening the workplace ebook, and I'll be enormously satisfied when that thing is done. So I'm inspired by things like that. Let's get that done, get it out. It's already basically written. I wrote it in a day because I'm quick moving, high D. I'm gonna, show it to my team, have them add, and then it'll be done. So I'm inspired by that kind of stuff, by that quick moving type of a way of getting things done. A high I is going to be motivated by the group activities and also by taking action. So a high I is also probably jumping in to get things done, but they're going to be inspired by that teamwork. With the example earlier, Tony wants to get together and work on our slides as a team, and that's what's energizing for her. And I'm a high I as well, so that also works for me. So that's what's going to be inspiring for her. So we actually recently lost a high I employee. She was sort of focused on building a project for us here in the office, and she just couldn't stand it. She really wanted to be out there in the world. I didn't have a role for her to be out there in the world doing the things that she wanted to do, but she was just like, I feel like I'm dying inside a little bit that I don't get to go out and visit and see people. So that's an example of she wasn't inspired by the job that she had. It was not in line with her DISC profile. A high C is motivated by opportunities to use their expertise and gain knowledge. So they really want to learn and understand and get systems in place. So you've got to make sure that your high Cs have that type of a workflow so that they can be inspired by the work that they're doing. And a high S will be inspired by collaboration and opportunities to help. So especially for a high S, the changes right now are going to be super hard on them. So if you can help them find ways to collaborate and work with others, that will help eliminate some of those fears. So bottom line, there's lots to consider when you're working on employee engagement with your employees, but DISC is one of those tools to help ensure you're giving employees what they need. All right, Tony, back to you for some personal leadership tips.
All right. Yes, so we'll go a little quicker through this part because these are just some tips to bear in mind. And if you're a high D, some things to consider is really looking at the people first, task second. That's a stretch. But if you can really put that in, one of the ways to do that would be through using softer tones. Just being more aware of how your nonverbals and your tone is coming across. And then give people time to process, be patient, and don't push. What this might mean is that you offer a request, and instead of demanding response right away or ideas right away, you build in that space to allow people to process and marinate and offer you something of quality back. For the next one, for a high I, one of the ways that you can do is, as Catherine has mentioned, make sure that you stay focused and that you are going to be credible by being a follow-through type person. One of the ways that helps me is I tend to make a lot of lists, and I can see what still needs to be done or what has been done. And believe me, if I've done something and it's not on the list, sometimes I put it there and check it off just because it makes
There's my list.
Yeah. Here's mine. Right. So I do feel good when I see that list, and that's definitely a way that you can gain some credibility with your team in that sense. Going on to a high S. Some of the things that would be wonderful tips to remember is really allow people to see what your observations are. Your feelings and thoughts absolutely matter. And embrace change. I know that's probably the most difficult for our really high S's during this time because change is happening. It seems like every single day something new, every week something new. So sometimes that can create a lot of fear. And for my high S's that live in this world right now, I love to remind them that fear is just an acronym. It stands for false evidence appearing real. So just take a breather, take a pause, and you're going to be just fine. So that's my little tip for high S's that we all get to learn from. And then lastly, looking at high C's, some personal leadership tips is do not overdo the details. You're going to be learning a tremendous amount of new things, most likely, that you will want to share. And if you cannot make people drink from a fire hose, that is awesome. So give them what they need, pretty much only what they need. And then you just rest assured that you're awesome because you have all this other information. And they also have to bear in mind to make it people first and not just task oriented. So as you're delivering wonderful information, or as you're pulling information from others, make sure to connect on that level. And one of the quickest and easiest ways is just to remember to smile. So especially on Zoom meetings where as we start to get relaxed, our face starts to do one of these. And then, but that's not very warm and fuzzy, right? So yeah, just be aware of how we're looking. I think actually Zoom has helped a lot of high Cs become more self-aware about how their body language is coming across. All right, back to you.
All right, so if you want to move on to the next slide, just wanted to share a couple things that we have for you. So if you're interested in taking the DISC assessment, shoot us an email. This is kind of the different parts of the report. It's a pretty comprehensive report. So you'll get a lot of good information, and then you'll get some time with Tony, and she'll walk you through your report and talk with you about some strategies for communication. So it's a great tool. If you're interested, shoot us an email. And, you know, right now, understanding your own strengths and the strengths of your team are super important, because you need to help your teams or yourself or both understand what they should be focusing on and how they can you know, be the most comfortable, and that would be to have them focused on the areas where they are strong. So, you know, just something that we wanted to offer up. If you're interested, just shoot us an email. Next slide for me there, please. And just, you know, some things to keep in mind, that there is no predictable end to this. And so your team and or you need assistance, you know, now more than ever. I feel like right now is a wonderful time to really understand where you excel, so that you can lean into that and be the best version of yourself that you can be right now. You know, you need to be the best leader you can be right now, whether it's with a team at work or at home with your family or in your community. Our communication in a time like this, when we're super stressed out, really does default to natural preferences, and stress tends to bring out the worst in us. So if you can, again, you know, understand yourself truly, or the people around you, then you can sort of alleviate some of that. And DISC really just gives you the opportunity to laser focus on communication and how to work well together. So there on the next slide, if you'd like to receive the cheat sheet that Tony was speaking about earlier, please do email us. We're happy to send it to you. It's a nice little one-pager. You can just print it out and stick it on your wall at the office there, or there at your home office. And it just kind of breaks down everything that we've been talking about, so that as you are getting emails from employees or colleagues or peers that you work with, you could pull out your cheat sheet and figure out pretty quickly what sort of a preference they are, what their profile is. So definitely email us and we'll send that over to you. So there on the last slide is just our thanks and our email address. And we've got a couple minutes if there's any final questions here on anything we've talked about. Please do send them over, and we'll see if we can respond to any of them. And I know there's a delay, so we may not get any, but you can also email us there at info@, and Tony can respond to your questions that way as well. So I'm not sure we have any other questions. We'll just give it a second.
Meanwhile, I just want to reiterate again, thank you everybody for making the time to be present here with us today, and participating and just wanting to learn more about DISC and yourself, and caring enough to learn how to communicate better. These are wonderful qualities, beautiful personal leadership qualities.
Look at that high eye saying thank you. And I'm like, email us. Do you have a question? Give me email us questions. Email us questions. You're like, hey everyone.
This is why teamwork is so important. Yes.
All right. Well, I don't see any questions coming through, so we will call it a day. Thanks so much for joining us again. Email us with any questions, and stay safe.
Thanks, everybody.